Death Note, a story about a young teenager named Light Yagami discovering a magical notebook where anyone's name who's written in it will ultimately perish. Seeing this as a way to better the world by cleansing it of all the bad, one man in particular becomes convinced that this massive loss of people, specifically criminals, is more than just a mere coincidence and suspects one or many men are behind it. This man in question being the world-class detective, L Lawliet, the detective whose brain matches that of several investigative bureaus put together. But in this hypothetical, he won't be facing the threat of Kira as he did in Death Note. Instead, his wits and intelligence will be directly compared in a one-on-one cat and mouse game with one of Batman's greatest intellectual adversaries, the Riddler. For this matchup, L Lawliet is replaced with the superhero vigilante detective, Bruce Wayne, or Batman. The win and loss conditions are a little weird and different from how they were in Death Note. L obviously can't kill the Riddler due to him being alike to Batman in a way, where it's up to the justice system, whereas the Riddler obviously doesn't care if Batman were to die, but mostly wants to just prove himself smarter and superior to Batman, which, in this case, is L. Which might seem like it's a bit of a disadvantage for L, but the Riddler never tries to outright kill Batman purposely. It's usually through riddles that he knows Batman can and will solve. The Riddler would likely create riddles and mind games to test L's abilities. He might leave a trail of clues and challenges for L to follow, with the ultimate goal of proving that he is the superior intellect. The Riddler would aim to outsmart L by creating situations that require extraordinary deductive reasoning, analytical thinking, and a deeper understanding of human behavior, meaning that the Riddler's win condition is to simply outsmart L enough to make L admit inferiority and leave him in a state of intellectual defeat or humiliation. Just for an example, Nier in the Death Note Extra continuation chapter actually admitted defeat when opposed by the second Kira, which the Riddler would actually probably get a huge kick out of and would, indeed, consider a win. L's win condition is a lot more simple since, even in Death Note, we're given the specifics of what L considers a win, as well as a loss. L's typical ideal win is sentencing the criminal. We know this as this was his main goal with the likes of Light, who he wanted to sentence to death for the actions of Kira. We also find out within the BB murder case novel, which is canon, that when BB lit himself on fire and killed himself, both L and BB actually considered this a loss for L, despite BB dying, because of the fact that he couldn't only sentence BB, but also couldn't prove he actually committed any crimes after L accepted the challenge, which ultimately led to L losing in his own eyes. In comparison to Light Yagami or Kira, the Riddler is very, very simple. He doesn't aim to create a better world or become any god. Instead, he's a crazed killer who simply wants to prove himself superior to any opposing threats in terms of his own intelligence. For instance, while the Joker is consistently trying to kill Batman, the Riddler is more so akin to just proving himself smarter. While Joker has this murderous and violent approach to things because that's just his dynamic, the Riddler just wants to say you're dumb in the form of riddles. So if he's able to complete a riddle that L just can't solve, then as I said, this would mean that L loses, as he's admitted intellectual defeat. But it would also mean that the Riddler has won. Of course, Riddler losing would be him put in a secure prison, never to be seen or heard from again. The Riddler, unlike someone like the Joker, who is a crazed superkiller, actually isn't, to a certain extent of course. At least in the older adaptations of the Riddler, we actually see him a lot more focused on stealing than actually killing. Killing isn't necessarily his main drive of crime. The only time we really see the classic Riddler endanger someone is when he's trying to distract or gain the attention of Batman, almost like a gentleman thief. Although more modern adaptations of Edward turn him into more of a Zodiac killer kind of guy, where in things like New 52 or the Batman movie, we see his schemes actually harming hundreds to potentially thousands of people, in which case would probably gain the attention of someone like L. If we're going with a more modern day Riddler kind of take, L would most likely take on the Riddler case. As mentioned in the BB murder case novel, L is described as only going and taking on cases that involve millions of dollars on the line, or if at least 10 or more victims are involved, in which case the Riddler would either already have that many victims to begin with, or would probably do anything in his power to gain the attention of the world-class detective. Obviously, someone like Batman doesn't exist in this alternate universe, so there really wouldn't be anyone to match the intelligence of the Riddler. For this hypothetical, we'll say that Edward gains the attention of L one way or another, whether it's through his crimes that he's already committed, or if he'll commit more crimes to gain his attention. From here, we can probably imagine the Gotham City Police Department reaching out to the world-class detective. L would immediately accept this challenge, knowing the amount of victims involved in the case, and from here we'd have to look at how Batman actually handles the Riddler and compare that to L. In terms of just how these two super detectives actually operate, it's very noticeable. For instance, L is consistently called, even by the author of the series, as probably even slightly evil. Not to mention, there's never a point in the series itself where L is actually just scared out of his mind or even worried about any of this group actually dying. In fact, there's many instances where he's even willing to sacrifice a life in exchange for information. For example, when L baited Kira into revealing himself by using Linda L. Taylor. He's definitely no saint, and he's pretty much crazy as he's willing to do this just to win a case. Batman isn't like this at all, as Batman is someone who follows the justice system to a T, for the most part. And that's honestly one of the main things that differentiates the two of these super detectives. Batman sees his villains as criminals. L sees it as competition. Similar to L, the Riddler also has this demented way of thinking, as Edward is always trying to prove himself superior to Bruce in terms of intelligence, viewing it as more of a battle of wits than actual crime versus justice. So immediately speaking, their way of just overall fighting would at least be more so akin to pride and almost nothing like how Batman actually operates. The Riddler usually gains the attention of Batman through riddles at crime scenes or just cryptic messages, but I would argue that the most fitting way to start this cat and mouse game, with the Riddler just being bored. With no Batman, there's no one to actually match him, and he needs to find someone who can match his own wit. We can probably imagine a scenario where the Riddler's pretty bored from no competition at all. With Batman not existing in this alternate timeline, Edward might actually try and fish out someone to give him a run for his money on live television, unironically, similar to what he does in the Arkham series. If we're using his more new side of morals, that he might even start killing people off until someone actually agrees to challenge his wits. With the Gotham City Police Department not having anyone to take this role, they'd likely have to reach out to the world-class detective, to which L would accept the role as the lead detective on the Riddler case. L would likely do this because of the Riddler's promise on live television that he'd kill victims until someone worthy agreed, but he'd most likely be in it for the challenge, similar to the Riddler. Again, L is no saint, and he's pretty slightly evil, if anything. L would probably figure out that the use of the riddles is more than just a gimmick, it's a compulsion for Edward. Edward struggles with OCD, and his ego prevents him from simply relying on his intelligence to outsmart others. In the comics, many of his crimes would go unsolved if he didn't leave a riddle as a clue. He can't just win. He feels compelled to prove he's the smartest by leaving a riddle that he hopes others can't solve. He believes that any police officer could stumble upon a bomb he's hidden, but it would take someone with exceptional intelligence to decode the puzzle he's presented as a challenge and find it. The Riddler revels in showcasing his intellectual superiority over others, which is why he dons such a flamboyant costume and isn't so shy about teasing others with audio recordings, or even leaving his signature question mark everywhere. He not only wants to demonstrate that he's the cleverest individual around, but also wants everyone to acknowledge it. L has employed actors in the past, using prisoners as decoys to lure out his targets, such as when he falsely revealed his identity to Light to track down Kira's whereabouts. To draw out the Riddler, L would likely orchestrate a grand scheme involving an actor posing as the Riddler in a public spectacle, perhaps with a fake bombing at the police department and a riddle of his own. Subsequently, L would release a video of himself failing to thwart the fake Riddler and vow to capture him in the future. This move alone would probably enrage the Riddler, as he detests the idea of someone he deems intellectually inferior stealing his spotlight by outsmarting L publicly. In his arrogance, the Riddler would probably begin living riddles, hinting at his true identity to assert his superiority over this fake Riddler that L actually orchestrated. This would be his way of proving that he is the actual Riddler, and far more cunning than the imposter that L introduced into the mix. Once the Riddler discovers L's plans and realizes that he's been manipulated with the fake Riddler decoy, he would likely be filled with a mixture of anger and admiration for L's cunning tactics. The Riddler, being a master strategist himself, would probably appreciate the complexity of L's plan, while also feeling a burning desire to outsmart and best L in return, similar to his desire to outsmart Batman. The Riddler would likely view L as a worthy opponent of intellect. L has previously observed that both he and Kira share a childish nature and strong aversion to losing, a trait that the Riddler also exhibits. However, the Riddler's method of asserting his dominance in their cat and mouse game involves leaving cryptic clues for others to decipher, testing their ability to solve his puzzles. On the other hand, Kira avoids easy-to-follow patterns and instead tries to disrupt any emerging trends in his crimes to taunt L. While Kira can break a pattern at will, the Riddler struggles to resist his compulsion to leave enigmatic hints, which often leads to his downfall despite an otherwise flawless plan or crime. Despite his disdain for losing, the Riddler also despises winning without the satisfaction of outsmarting his opponent in a battle of wits that he orchestrates for himself. Edward is a very odd person. He doesn't like losing, as shown in his constant need to prove he's intellectually superior to Batman, but he also despises winning. Now, one feat that really does make you wonder whether a prison would even be enough to contain the Riddler would be one of his feats in Batman: Death of the Family, where he was able to create 46 different ways to escape a jail cell that was made specifically to hold him. And although he doesn't actually escape the cell, it isn't because his plans were flawed. It was completely due to the fact that he caught onto a guard shift change and was only waiting for a pattern to present itself for a good chance to escape. Now, we aren't actually given a time frame of this feat, but a cell designed to specifically keep the Riddler contained is infinitely more secure than even the best prisons in our world, which would also apply to the Death Note universe, or this alternate timeline DC sort of exists alongside it. Now, the first thing in question before I keep going on with the feats is, if L actually succeeds in imprisoning Riddler, or Edward, would he ever be able to keep him imprisoned? And if he couldn't, what is L's course of action? If the Riddler was able to actually break out of the prison, one of the many questions that would arise would be, would he even care? I would probably say yes, and that's mainly due to the fact that Riddler isn't a light criminal by any means. The severity of his crimes are continuously pretty bad, and that's in pretty much every comic or issue that he's in. L may want a true execution for Edward, and would definitely want him to stay in jail and serve his time.
The Riddler is consistently shown in most adaptations to be relative, if not outright equal to Bruce Wayne in terms of intelligence. This is very evident from the various times where he's able to just outright win against him. For example, in the Batman's Adventures, Edward, or the Riddler, is shown outsmarting Batman via him not being able to solve the riddle he made after robbing the Gotham Museum for jewelry. The reason I wouldn't exactly say this is outright smarter than Batman is because this came at the cost of him actually getting captured, a win in terms of intellectual status, but saying outsmarting Batman a single time would be a bit ridiculous to say he's just smarter, though he should at least be relative in terms of IQ. In Batman Hush, the Riddler is also shown completely deducting Batman's identity from simply having one conversation with him. Now, the Riddler finding L's identity isn't really that useful for the Riddler, as the Riddler doesn't have the Death Note, obviously. But it's a bit questionable as to whether or not he'd be able to deduce L's identity specifically. Obviously, Bruce Wayne is someone who's well known in Gotham, whereas L Lawliet is someone the Riddler has no prior knowledge of. Again, it's not necessarily a useful piece of information, but it does highlight Edward's IQ and deductive reasoning quite a bit. Not only this, but in the animated series of DC, he's also stated to have the highest IQ of any and all Batman victims in the DCAU, with the Batman being the only person in verse who's ever been able to solve any of his riddles, and calling Batman his, quote, match. Batman on multiple occasions has insanely crazy feats, such as having better predictability than Brainiac, who is a 12th level intellect, where 6th level intellects in the DC universe rival the intelligence of the entire world, meaning that Batman can actually rival a being who's smarter than all of humanity combined, with the Riddler constantly being able to outsmart Batman and being relative in every continuity. So yes, the Riddler is far more capable than Light Yagami ever was in the original Death Note series, leaving L extremely outmatched in terms of intelligence, only being able to match several intelligence agencies put together. Despite this, Edward still has his fair share of weaknesses that will definitely hold him back.
Based on that, he probably wouldn't consider him breaking out a loss, but he would definitely keep going and pursue the Riddler once again until he actually is contained for good. And really the only way I see L ever losing to Riddler, just escaping, would be a lack of motivation, similar to what we saw in the Yotsuba arc of Death Note, where he was demotivated and was willing to drop the case entirely if it hadn't been for Light actually motivating him to continue. But with no Light, if L were to somehow keep up with a Brainiac level intellect and actually put him in prison, it would never contain him. And that's only if L were to succeed or allowed L to jail him. All in all, I think Riddler wouldn't get the same itch scratched by L as he does with Batman, but L being the world's greatest mind, it's all he can live by. Meaning Edward probably allows L to take advantage of his OCD, which is very likely. L could have the theoretical win due to Riddler allowing this to happen, but again, this is all completely hypothetical. The characters shown are obviously built for two different worlds, and I'm not a writer. If you think this was accurate enough, drop a like and subscribe. Helps me out a ton and lets me know you enjoy videos like this. Thanks for watching, and bye.